Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our very first program here at Onera Foundation. My name is Laurence Laforgue. I'm the Executive Director of the Onera Foundation, and it is a true pleasure to welcome you for such a special occasion. We have a great program for you tonight, so I'll be extremely brief. Quickly, the Onera Foundation was started in 2018 by David Peterson, whom you'll hear from tonight. And the mission of the foundation is to educate and advocate for the preservation of historic American architecture. At the heart of our mission is the belief that America's significant architecture is a vital part of our culture, worth protecting in the same way we safeguard other national treasures. For the past 7 years, the foundation has supported scholarly research through the Onera Prize at Columbia University, one of the largest academic prizes of its kind in the field of preservation. With the opening of 63 Park Street, we're now able to expand our work to present annual art exhibitions, films, and public programs like this one, programs that we hope will expand and deepen the public's understanding of historically significant architecture. Tonight's panel is part of the opening events for Treaties on Defense, an exhibition by artist and preservation architect Jorge Otero-Pailos, who's here with us tonight, together with David and Eeva-Liisa. On view throughout the garden level and the first floor, you've seen the exhibition, which features sculptures made from historic fencing material that belong to the Saarinen Design US Embassy in Oslo, along with exquisite watercolor drawings and an artist's book of prints that Jorge was inspired to create while restoring the embassy building after it was decommissioned by the State Department in 2017. Our conversation this evening will focus on Eero Saarinen's extraordinary contribution to design and architecture, including the American embassies he designed in London and Oslo as part of the Cold War era State Department initiative known as the US Embassy program. We will reflect on what happens when these mid-century embassies are decommissioned and consider how the most creative approach to preservation can open new pathways for adaptive reuse in ways that both honor the building's original intent and ensure that these structures remain usable and forward-looking. We are honored to be joined by 3 distinguished speakers whose extensive biography you can find in your program. Eeva-Liisa is a professor at Yale University School of Architecture and the author of Eero Saarinen, Shaping the Future. She will begin by presenting Saarinen's extraordinary life, accomplishment, and the cultural significance of his oeuvre, before focusing on his diplomatic architecture in London and Oslo. We're very lucky to have Eeva-Liisa, who's about to fly for 4 weeks in Australia. Thank you for joining us. And then David Peterson, who in addition to being the founder and president of the Onera Foundation, is the author of the award-winning book, US Embassy of the Cold War, The Architecture of Democracy, Diplomacy and Defense, which you can find at the entrance as well. David will help us situate Saarinen's embassy project within the broader US Embassy program and the Cold War. And last, Jorge Otero-Pailos, who in addition to being an artist, a preservationist, is also professor and director of historic preservation program at Columbia University, will share his experience preserving the many layers of history embedded in the embassy and how he has turned to art in order to advocate for these faraway mid-century masterpieces at a time where many are being decommissioned with little preservation protection. Each presenter will speak in turn, followed by a short discussions amongst the panelists, and then we'll open the conversation to your questions. Once again, thank you for joining us tonight. And with that, it's my great pleasure to invite Eeva-Liisa to the podium.
So I thought it would be good to start giving a little overview of Saarinen's life and career. And I named the talk Eero Saarinen's Extraordinary Life because he had an extraordinary life. And kind of international life as well. He was born in Finland, in a completely different era. You can see from these pictures, this is about when he was 10 years old, so this is about maybe 1920. Eero Saarinen in Finland with his father, you get a sense of the life he led in this kind of almost medievalist enclave outside Helsinki. We are talking Sibelius coming for dinner Maxim Gorky coming for dinner, private governors from Britain. So it was a very, very special childhood. The family moved to the US in the early 20s. Finland had just become independent. I think the work dried out. The father was a very successful architect in Finland, like a super successful. Opportunity rose in America. They land here in the Midwest. And soon enough, the father gets a huge commission to design the Cranbrook Academy, you might know, in just outside Detroit. And here, I mean, this is again an extraordinary life. Around the time Saarinen himself, the son Saarinen, was about 16, he was designing things for Cranbrook with his father. He built this model and he did these little sculptures in various loci. You can see them in Cranbrook. I mean, age 16. So very early start for a career. He then goes to Yale, returns to Cranbrook to work with his father and a textile designer mother. They designed many. It's an amazing story also because the father, like I said, had a very successful career in Finland, kind of a national romantic architect, comes to the country and becomes a pioneering modernist in this country. Together they design various buildings that are landmarks. You see them titled a school, one of the first modernist schools in the country, all in the 30s. One of the first, and I think the first, kind of modernist church that became a model for further modernist churches for Columbus, Indiana. And they're together, the father and son, in front of winning entry for the National Gallery for the Washington Mall, which was never built. Saarinen then moves on, starts working together with his great friend Charles Eames. They've been a competition for MoMA, for modern furnishing competition. So this is Saarinen at the age, 31. So again, pretty early start on a national state in this country. And indeed, the first designs that Saarinen does under his own name were furnishings together with his great childhood friend Florence Knoll, who for the Knoll factory. These are all classics, as you know, some of them here surrounding us. Then again, another kind of extraordinary historical moment, the son beats the father in the St. Louis Arch competition in 1948, so Saarinen being 38. The famous story is that the congratulation telegram went to E. Saarinen, so they thought it's the father, Eero Saarinen. They already celebrated the father's win, only to find out that it was indeed the son. And here you can see in New York Times article, now Saarinen, the son. It's indeed one of the only kind of really famous where the father and the son are equally famous. So great story for history. The father dies in 1950 while sitting on the son's womb chair. That's also a very sweet moment. Saarinen inherits from the father a commission to design the GM Tech Center. It had kind of laid dormant because there was a big strike for the automobile workers union. The project starts in 1950, and it was the biggest construction site in the world, the most expensive building ever built. It was a whole campus of 32 buildings, more than 300 acres. I think the total bill at that time was $100 million. So when we multiply that, we are talking, I think, $1 billion at the current contemporary. As you can see, the sun lands on the cover of Time magazine, and what you see in the background is the plan for that GM Tech Center. That building itself, I mean, it starts to a whole slew of contracts with major corporations that Saarinen gains due to this fame. GM was at that time world's biggest corporation and a pioneer for car design. This is, I think, a very funny model shot how they were designing cars using clay, carving clay. So this was all happening, and the cars were displayed in this dome called the styling dome. So you have a styling building. So this was the moment that cars, started to get colors and this sort of goofy, fashionable design. So Saarinen's building matched that elegance and that design, and indeed the building became a site for fashion shoots. This is from the opening, and there was also a kind of a Cold War moment. Somebody had an idea that they should launch a controlled nuclear blast to celebrate the opening of the GM Tech Center. President Eisenhower is speaking. So this was truly a mega building, a celebrated building that, in a scale that was done. It was kind of duped the American industrial Versailles. So many commissions to these leading American companies followed suit. He designed 2 buildings for IBM. This one is for Rochester, Minnesota. There's also a funny story with that. They chose the loci for the research facility based on the SAT scores. So apparently Rochester, Minnesota had the highest SAT scores in the country at that time, so hence the loci. Thomas Watson, I think, was the native of New Canaan, lived in New Canaan. The other facility was in Yorktown Heights, across the border in New York site. And this is the building where they had the match between the chess match with the deep blue. So this is the home of the deep blue. A bucolic setting, this kind of, Saarinen was also a pioneer of this sort of idea of the corporate estate, that when the corporation started to move to the countryside from the city, that, they were surrounded by these very bucolic landscapes, etc. Another important, and these are again the plum jobs that all the dreams, jobs that any other architect would wish to have. So many that apparently Saarinen didn't even have time to be involved with all of them. This is for Deere Factory in Moline, Illinois. And they chose, this is the first building where they used Corten steel. Corten steel had till that time really been used only for rail tracks. Saarinen's office pioneered its use of the building. Of course, it was symbolic, tractors, Corten steel, that sort of association. I find it very sweet that there was actually a theater for tractors. So if you wanted to buy a tractor, you went to the theater and they displayed the tractor on stage. Another, again, the kind of the superlatives just keep coming. I mean, the biggest, the most expensive. This is for the Bell Labs in Homestead, in New Jersey. The first use of Miro glass. This was also kind of interesting story. Kevin Roche told me that when they proposed this idea of Miro glass, it was not yet invented. And they tried to go to various companies like Pilkington Glass Factory, and they said this is a stupid idea. And they finally got a company that made the reflectors for car lights, headlights, to make a prototype. And of course, rest is history. This became a super successful product. And you can see again the scale of this building is huge. I think they tore down half of it recently. Only the front was preserved. And if you've seen the television series Severance, it's filmed in that very building. CBS, again, like company, it's also interesting, company from tractors to computing to media. So this is the famous Black Rock near Museum of Modern Art. Saarinen with the what's his name, Frank Stanton, who insisted that the building should be black. It took a long time to find black granite. I think they finally found it in Canada. Buildings for major universities, including 2 at Yale, worth a trip to see the rink. Very controversial at the time. Even the donors really did not like it at first, until Scully wrote a letter to them and said, it's actually a Gothic building. This is the Morse and Stiles colleges, the Whitney Library, which kind of matches the Gothic. So Saarinen did buildings also in many styles. He had no kind of a fixed idea of what architecture should look like. So looking back and looking back in time to history, and then looking forwards and experimenting with these very new materials and so forth. Actually 3 airports, 2 in the US and 1 in Athens, which is also, I think, now in the works of preservation and restoration. And then the 2 embassies. And it's interesting to think about these 2 embassies, what role they have in Saarinen's work. He was very quick also to adopt new ideas and problems. And one of the conversations that probably comes up in David's talk is the idea that buildings should fit into their context, that buildings should be good neighbors. And the way that Saarinen kind of took on that problem of contextualizing the buildings to their site, to their culture, is also kind of a sign of his kind of nimble way of responding to the culture, to a kind of a problem at hand, and finding a kind of stylistic solution to them. So it's interesting. So Saarinen died age 51. Most of the buildings that I showed were still in the work, so he didn't see many of them completed. He did see the embassies finished. They were finished before he died, but most buildings, the CBS, the Deere, Bell Labs, none of these buildings were finished. They were finished by his right-hand man, Kevin Roche, together choosing the granite for the CBS tower. It's kind of almost like the gravestone, I feel, for Saarinen. But you look at this picture, and I often thought that, this guy was, in this picture, he was less than 50 years old, but he looks very old. And whether it was that he was just working very, very hard, but he certainly looks older than 50. And I'm looking at those dates, and we will be talking about the London embassy later, but that was, of course, completed in 1960. So I think one of those stamps being admitted to New York is when he's coming back from London. The last project that he was finished, the Eero Saarinen Associates, kept its name. There was a legal contract that it kept its name till the last project was finished. And the last project to be finished was the St. Louis Arch. It was completed in 1965. And the Yale archives, we have all these drawings. They are just amazing documentation of how difficult it was, and part of the reason for these delays, I mean, there were many reasons, including the Korean War and so forth, funding problems, but that it was so difficult to complete structurally. And you can see, it looks like it's one piece, but it was built from these pieces. And this is a chart that shows exactly the dimensions of all those pieces that were brought up with the crane. The image on the left is also one of my favorite images. It really speaks about Saarinen's versatility and interest in architectural history. He shows that he had studies all these sort of arches, from Gothic arches to the Roman triumphal arches. So he really worked on this project. It was his first project that launched his independent career, but the last one then to be finished. So I think it's very, very sweet. I want to end my talk showing a little film clip from a movie that was a documentary movie called The Monument to the Dream that documents the construction project of the St. Louis Arch. It won actually the Oscar for the best documentary in 1967. Charles Guggenheim is the director. And it gives you really the sense of, I think, some of the kind of the magnitude and cultural and political significance of Eero Saarinen's building. It's very pompous, but it gives you a good sense of the significance of his work. Now I just have to get this.
Be ready to stop anytime. Keep coming up like yours. I may stop you anytime now. Where am I at now, man? The flag's right about even with the top of yours. All right, hold her right there. That's good. That's high low. That's high low, Jim. That's high. What's that all about? What's that? All them whistles. I don't know. Steamboats, I guess. Celebrate.
The historian was writing of Lewis and Clark, but the spirit of his words belongs just as truly to those who shaped and raised this monument. By strength and skill and valor, they rolled the unknown back before them. They were too weary, uncomfortable, and much too seasoned to rejoice. But an idea in the restless mind of Thomas Jefferson had been given flesh. Meriwether Lewis's dream had come true, and the thing was done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eeva-Liisa. Not easy to follow you. Jesus, she's such an expert. It's crazy. Thank you all for coming. This is one of the inaugural events, the Onera Foundation, so thank you for being here. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Cold War, the programming within the embassies, the Cold War embassies themselves, and then finish talking about what's happened to those embassies. As many of you know, when the Cold War started, it's hard to pinpoint because there were no bullets fired, there were no bombs dropped. But not long after World War II is pretty much the consensus. But it was a lot about problem solving for the US because the Soviet Union wanted to expand. And there were two documents. Is this working? No. Two documents that really highlight, I mean, they're obviously important documents, but George Kennan's long telegram in 1946, followed by the NSC top secret report in 1950 in the Truman administration, NSC 68. Kennan outlined that the Soviet Union planned or wanted to expand communism around the world, and the Truman administration with NSC 68 came back and said secretly that the most important international focus for the United States was the containment of communism. So I try to teach my kids all the time, you've got to problem solve. So now you've got the Soviet Union that wants to expand communism. You've got the US that wants to contain communism. So what the hell do you do? Well, Eric Schlosser's here, who wrote a very well-regarded book, Pulitzer Prize finalist, called Command and Control, about the nuclear armament infrastructure in this country. But the first thing we did as a deterrent is we expanded significantly our nuclear warheads. As you can see, in 1950, we had less than 300 warheads. By the 1960, we had almost 20,000. That's quite a deterrent. What else did we do? We founded the CIA in 1947. Why did we do that? Well, as many of you may know, the FBI operates in the United States. The CIA is only allowed to operate outside the US. So this was about gathering intelligence and information about what our adversaries were doing, and our principal adversary was the Soviet Union. What else did we do? We started something called the US Information Agency. At the time, it was the largest broadcaster, publisher in the world. It managed the world's fairs around the world, and most importantly for today, the US Information Services areas within the US Embassies. I'll talk about that in a minute. What we didn't know, we found out later in the mid-60s, early 70s, was that the CIA and the US Information Agency were working together to expand exhibitions, culture, and so forth around the world. This was one of the Museum of Modern Art early exhibitions called Architecture of the State Department. These are the two Harrison and Bromwitz embassies. What else did we do? The US Information Agency promoted music around the world, in particular the Boston Symphony Orchestra and Louis Armstrong. Tom Braden, who was one of the senior CIA officers at the time. I don't know how old some of you are, but Tom was part of a show in the 1970s, 80s, I can't remember, called 8 Is Enough. It was about a family in Washington. Anyways, that was Tom Braden. Anyway, Tom Braden said the Boston Symphony Orchestra won more acclaim for the U.S. than Dwight D. Eisenhower could have done with 100 speeches. And why? So you have art, you have music. Why are those ideal? Because you don't need an interpreter. It's actually pretty smart. The CIA was responsible for the Congress of Cultural Freedom that published magazines and literature around the world. The Encounter magazine here was based in London. Some great writers were part of it, but none of the writers knew until many years later. And this was an odd one. It's fun to do research. The CIA actually helped to finance Hilton hotels around the world. Why? Because the Hilton hotels were considered some of the most modern structures in the world, and they portrayed America as a very modern, progressive country. In fact, you could go into a Hilton hotel anywhere in the world, and you could get a cheeseburger and a Coke and a milkshake. Well, it didn't last for long. It only lasted for about a year. In 1959, Batista overthrew Castro, and it became Castro's headquarters for a while. I kind of like that picture with the guy with the gun in the front. It's kind of cool. So let's talk about a little bit about what was going on within the embassies. I didn't know until I started doing my research on embassies. I thought embassies were about diplomacy only. Turns out there's a lot more going on in embassies than we knew, and a big part of that was the U.S. Information Services. And what did they do? As you can see, this pointer works. Of course it doesn't. Oops. This is not going to work. But here's the lobby here. And you can see here, there's an auditorium, there's a library. But there were libraries and auditoriums within the embassies, not all of the embassies. But you could literally walk from the street into the U.S. Information Services Library. You could go in and see a movie, you could see a lecture, you could see a news broadcast. Security was not even a thought. And these are some of the images of the libraries in Havana, Oslo, and London. Again, simple, but open and accessible. The library in London at the time had over 60 people working in the library. They had over 100,000 people visit annually. Here's images of the auditoriums. The big part, Shauna will enjoy this, but the big part within the embassies was art. And why art? Well, art was one of those things you didn't need an interpreter. And the abstract expressionists were in particular, were prominent. Why? Because when you think about abstract expressionism, you think about free flow, non-geometric, non-figurative. It's about the most open and creative, I think, well, again, I'm not an artist, but among the most creative arts you can do. This show in 1962 with the US Embassy, Saarinen's embassy in London, had some of the greatest abstract expressionist artists in the world. It's Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock. I mean, it was a blockbuster. If that show were today, I mean, who cares about the money, but that would be $1 billion plus show. There were those that didn't like abstract expressionism. One was Premier Khrushchev, who said this about abstract expressionism. And that's William de Kooning's painting. Probably not that crazy because that painting sold a number of years ago for over $100 million. So let's look quickly at some of the embassies. Over 25 were built around the world right after World War II to display an open, progressive, modern democracy. The idea was to essentially have a billboard for what represented America. They were built in dense urban environments. As you can see, this is Saarinen's embassy in London. You see how close it is to the residential neighborhood. It was a problem and one of the reasons why they ended up selling the embassy, but we'll talk about that in a minute. When the State Department decided to hire the architects to build the embassy program in the late 40s and early 50s, this is kind of the all-star team. I don't know how many sports people are here, but this is like the all-star baseball, all-star NBA. I mean, this is the greatest architects in the world, but US architects. They may have emigrated from Europe, but they were based in the US. Some are close to home here. Fred Noyce is here, so his dad was part of the Harvard Five, but John Johansson and Marcel Breuer were two of the architects for the embassy building program. Eero Saarinen was obviously part of it. We'll come back to see on the right, that's Bertoya's panels at the Manufacturers Hanover, former Manufacturers Hanover Bank. It's still there. It's actually an interior landmark of the city. I know Eeva-Liisa is the expert on Saarinen, and she told me that Florence Knoll and Saarinen weren't involved together, but I took a look at this picture and I thought, it kind of reminds me of that Coldplay, that they're looking at each other awfully lovingly, but whatever, that's fine. Anyway, so we're going to find out in a minute, but artists were also involved as part of the embassy program. This is Harris and Abramowitz. The early embassies were international style, rectilinear, which means no straight lines, no curves, the lack of ornamentation. It's amazing to think. I mean, that building's 70-some years old. That was pioneering in the day. And in fact, so here's Harris and Abramowitz in Havana. This was probably the most controversial of all embassies that have been built just because of the relationship with the US. Not long after it was built, it's the Bay of Pigs in 1961. Yeah, here's Florence Knoll's furniture in the lobby of the embassy. Many of you may recognize. As I was saying earlier, the embassy didn't last long. Here's Batista's female militia. It was actually the headquarters for a little while. After the embassy personnel moved out, you can see in the back in red that says US Embassy. Just as fun to see this. This is the Soviet embassy in Cuba right now. It looks like a prison tower to me, or I don't know what it looks like, but it's not exactly inviting and open. Again, early embassies were very international style oriented. You can see, again, Eeva-Liisa and Jorge are the architects, but some of this cantilevering, this kind of multiple volumes. It almost looks contemporary today. I mean, it's really amazing how prescient they were. You see in the red there that says US Information Services. So you could walk literally right off the street, walk into the library, open the door, no security. Stockholm. New Delhi, one of the most famous of the embassies, Edward Durrell Stone. Frank Lloyd Wright said it was one of the greatest buildings ever built, and certainly the best building that the US government has ever built. Interior courtyard, there's a lot of design effects for the heat and sun in India. So you can see it's raised on a plinth that's got brise soleil, it's got the interior water courtyard, and it was visited by Jackie Onassis at one time. That's how important it was. Athens, Walter Gropius, who founded the Bauhaus in 1919. The Nazis shut it down in 1933. He used the same Pentelic marble that was built for the Parthenon. But if you were going to pick the single most important architect to build the embassy in Athens, who was thrown out of Germany by the Nazis, Walter Gropius would probably be a guy. These are some of the buildings that were proposed or built. You can see the Bauhaus on the left. Oslo, this is Saarinen's building. You can see the plan, again, outlining the entrance for the US Information Services. Here in the middle, it's hard to see, but that's Harry Bertoya's gong. Now that the embassy's been decommissioned, obviously that is out of the embassy. It is going actually to the new expansion for the US Embassy in Athens, Greece. As Eeva-Liisa was talking about being contextual and Saarinen thinking about the neighborhood and the scale of the buildings, you can see here, you get a flavor about how positioned, located the embassy was in London. But you can see from, I think, hopefully from these angles, that the scale, the size of the building was proportional. It was actually pretty well done because it didn't dominate the square, even though it is probably the greatest site, one of the greatest sites in London on Grosvenor Square. Theodore Roszak was the designer of the controversial gilded eagle on the top of the embassy. You can see in the middle picture, that's Saarinen, who actually commissioned Roszak to do this, working up in Hudson, New York, or actually, sorry, Beacon, New York, when they were building the eagle. Here's Marcel Breuer, one of the Harvard Five, building in The Hague. Don Hatch. These panels on the front, those are Harry Bertoya's. And one of the final embassies built during the Cold War is Dublin. That's soon going to be decommissioned because it's too small and can't be adequately protected. So quickly, to finish, of the 25 plus embassies that were built, there's only a handful that still remain. They've either been sold, abandoned, or knocked down. Why did that happen? Primarily 1998 in Kenya and Tanzania, two simultaneous suicide bombers destroyed both embassies. It was called Ken Bomb and Tan Bomb by the FBI. And you say, wait, I just said the CIA operates internationally, the FBI doesn't operate internationally. Embassies are considered sovereign US territory. So it became the oversight of the FBI to the investigation. At the time, it was the largest investigation in the history of the FBI. But that changed everything in terms of the building program for the embassies. And what came? Basically institutions, prison-like, high security walls. It's just the opposite of what was built during the Cold War. That's not inviting, open, and accessible. That doesn't say to me, this is a progressive, creative. That says to me, this is a country that's scared, that's on its back feet, that's all about defense. So here's Jose Luis Serra, who also went to Harvard. This embassy's abandoned. The embassy in Greece, or New Delhi, sorry, is being expanded. So one of the benefits of some of the larger footprints, in particular in New Delhi, that's about a 25-acre parcel so they can expand and they can defend it. The problem with the buildings that were built in the cities is they were built so closely next to other buildings, and you can't adequately protect them in that environment. So they're moving outside the cities. They're much, much larger footprints. So London was sold, gutted. I can't go. It just annoys the crap out of me. But anyway, this is what it's become. The Chancery, which means embassy. And Rozak's Eagle, I don't know how it remained. Qatari investment fund bought it, and it just opened in the last few months. And they're advertising the hell out of it. But you can see up top, that's the kind of premier bar now in London overseeing Grosvenor Square. But that's a US piece of art. I don't know how I have to look it up. I don't know what happened. Somebody screwed up, let's put it that way. They also screwed up, sorry, you're gonna have to, they added a floor here. And for those people, architects, Nate'll understand, but the proportion of those windows is completely different than the rest of the fenestration, as it's called, but the rest of the windows in the front. It kind of screws up the whole geometry of the building. This is Karen Timberlake's new US Embassy that opened a few years ago. They call it the Ice Cube. It's 40 minutes or so outside of London. It's surrounded by a moat. It's 6.5 acres. It's 500,000 square feet. It's $1 billion. So what's happened is the State Department decided, because of security and other things that have happened, it's called co-location. They want all the operations to be in one building. So what does that mean? You can't find 6.5 or 7 acres in London. So you've got to move all these buildings outside. So that's what's happened. This is Mexico City. This is 450,000 square feet. It's 12 acres. I mean, these are institutions. I understand the need for security. That's got to be the #1 priority. But security and design should not be mutually exclusive. And the good news is, we're kind of going back. So this is Jeannie Gang's building that's going up in Brasilia. She's one of the great architects working today. And I think the emphasis on design is coming back, so that it's not just about security and protecting diplomats. The other good news is that while we can lament that the cultural programming in the embassies is never going to happen again because of security. You're not going to see libraries, you're not going to see auditoriums. It's just not going to happen. You can't walk off the street and walk into an embassy. Excuse me. But art is still important. And there's an organization called the Foundation for Art and Preservation in Embassies, whose mandate is to help put American art in embassies around the world. That's happening frequently and in a good way, but it's interesting, that's why I'm showing these pictures. It's outside the embassies, it's on the exterior, so they're not putting the art. This is Ellsworth Kelly in China. They're keeping it visible from the street for the most part, but you can't just walk into the embassy and view the art. Now, will they have exhibitions, cocktails? Sure, they're going to do that. But again, the ability to walk and walk around and have access to embassies is long gone. So my hope, to conclude, is that cultural diplomacy, soft power, whatever you want to call it, even though the current administration doesn't really believe in it, that's fine, is terribly important. But I think we have to find a new way. Maybe this is an opportunity. Is there a way that you can think about when you build maybe one of these embassies, can you have a building that might be on the perimeter that could be an American cultural center? You don't have to worry about the security issues 24/7. I don't know, but it's an opportunity to think about it. But it's going to take some good creative minds. But the good news is the State Department and the government is beginning to think about design and the importance of that message, because architecture doesn't speak, but it sends a message. Jorge Otero-Pailos, terribly creative. That's why we're here tonight to some degree. whose embassy work is terribly important. So, Jorge?
Great. Well, thank you, David. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Laurence. Thank you all for being here tonight. So exciting to have this conversation with you. I want to talk a little bit about what happens after the embassies are sold. And so a little bit about my work with the US Embassy in Norway. So about over a decade now, I caught wind of the fact that the US Embassy was being sold in Norway. And I started getting interested. What can we do? It's very difficult to preserve these embassies because they're, as David said, they are sovereign land, so local preservation laws don't apply. And so you can't preserve them until they're sold. But when they're sold, it's a little bit too late. And so because the developers can come, they tear them down or they gut them. Within a couple weeks, demolition goes fast, and the preservation authorities take a while to catch up. So together with students in 2013, there's a picture of us over there, we went over and started doing all the research that needed to be done and started to communicate with the Oslo authorities to say, this building is important, it's going to be sold, you should be aware of it. And so we published a report, we gave it to the local authorities, and they were very smart. They put out a document, and they published it in the press that said, buyer beware, whoever buys this, we are actually going to preserve this embassy. So factor that into your bids when you try to, bid for the price of the embassy. A long story short, we ended up being successful. The building was designated a landmark of Norway and national landmark. And then there was an international competition to preserve the embassy, and I joined one of the teams together with Lund Hagem and Atelier Oslo and Erik Langdalen, and we won the competition. And so we got a chance to actually work on this project. We restored the whole embassy. We won a number of prizes. We made the cover of Architectural Record. So we were very proud of that work. And we were trying to bring back this 1959 embassy. Here you see the Marine putting up the flag. But a lot had changed in the process. The beautiful black facades, it was precast concrete made black. If you know anything about precast concrete, it doesn't want to be black. It likes to be gray because the more black you put in, the weaker it gets, the aggregate and so on. So they actually had put an oil on it. We did all this research. They had put linseed oil on it. And this is how we found it. We found it it was gray. It had a lot of air conditioning units because the original building didn't have air conditioning. It only had heating. So we did all these existing condition studies, mapped exactly all the damage that was done, all the way the concrete has spalled, these are the different units. The rebar was exposed in a number of areas. They really had practically no maintenance in the previous 50 years. So we did a whole study of how do we match the concrete, how do we restore when there is a small break, a missing area, how do we fill it in? We work with a number of different concrete companies to figure it out. And then, of course, it's very difficult because these are actually panels that are they were prefab panels that were inserted in place. So when a piece of the panel breaks, you couldn't just remove the panel because these are load-bearing walls. We had to figure out a way that by hand we could go in and fix the problem. We did a bunch of cleaning tests. And so in the end, we ended up having to do all these repairs, and because the surface was slightly different and it had, the surface of the building had eroded and it wasn't polished anymore, we actually made the very expensive decision to buff the entire facade by hand. So we polished the entire facade, and then we ended up reapplying this linseed oil to bring back that black color. A lot went into the interiors as well. We did. We luckily you could not add to the volume, so we went underground and built 3 stories underground. So we literally removed the foundations off of the embassy, dug 3 stories down, and then you can see the embassy here is levitating above the ground. And this is while we had the excavation happening. Amazing crew that did this work. And then as the area was being filled, this became a new entrance to the embassy in the back, because the embassy only had entrances in the front. But that street connects all the way down to the Oslo Opera House. So that back street had become very important. So there is a new entrance behind this wall over here that comes down, and this is that double height space underneath the embassy, which is now a public gallery, and it's a gym and all sorts of things of public access. Now, there was a desire also. All developers like to add to buildings. They want more square footage, so the developer wanted to do something on the roof. It has great views. It's sit across from the Royal Palace. So we looked, and of course, what Saarinen had on the roof was the mechanical systems. And you can see this small line over there is the mechanical systems of the embassy, all the HVAC. So what we did is that we actually moved all the HVAC to the ground and put it into that underground addition that I was just mentioning, and turned the volume of the former mechanical system. This is a construction photo, but this is all glass now. So this became a new restaurant up at the rooftop, which is semi-publicly accessible. They hold events there. But this is now a restaurant over here, and you can see that the volume of the embassy itself has not changed at all from the street. We restored all of the interiors. I don't have time to get into that, but all the windows were removed, restored, double glazed. All the teak was restored. We actually went to a building next door that was you can't get teak these days, so we salvaged a lot of the wood that was coming down in a neighboring building to restore all the teak interiors. But as wearing my architect's hat, I could help to do all that work as part of our team, but there was things that I couldn't do. And one of the things I couldn't do was to save the fence around the building, which you can see over here. And I had a gut feeling that fence was very important, but it was not designated as part of the designation report by the Norwegian government. So it was to come down. It was to be removed. And I said, I would like to save this damn thing. So wearing my artist hat, I stepped forward and talked to the owner and said, would you allow me to preserve this fence? And we had breakfast one morning, and he said, okay, you can take the fence. And so then I had to figure out what to do with this fence. Now, why did I get so obsessed with the fence? Well, part of it is because of what was standing behind me over here. The interior of the embassy has this treatment of the multiple floors that, although Saarinen never said it, looks to me awfully like a fence. So inside the interior atrium is this fence. And I asked myself, why might he have done that? Well, if you think about it, and David mentioned this, an embassy is the people. The building itself is a chancery, and the word chancery comes from the Latin word cancellus, which means fence or gates. So a chancery is in fact symbolically a fence. It's a place that you can see, it's protected, but you can still interact with, because a fence is not a wall. A fence is permeable. So there was an indoor fence, and then there was an outdoor fence that was put up after this program to protect embassies that David was talking about. So I wanted to see if we could preserve the fence somehow. And so in 2019, I was the one to actually take down the fence, but I took down the fence artistically. So I used the demolition equipment as my paintbrush, as my chisel, and directed the workmen that were tearing down that were working with me to twist the line of the fence in a particular way to achieve these sculptures. And so I was very interested in the idea that a fence is a line. It divides things. It sets up a confrontation between people, even though there can be an exchange through it. And I wanted to see if I could turn a line into a volume, to take a two-dimensional thing and turn it into a three-dimensional thing. something one could walk around and actually have an exchange around. So art at its best is something we can talk about together. And so I took all the pieces and then cut some of them and welded them back together into these large sculptures, some of which you can see around you, some of the smaller ones, which then were able to allow me to take the story of this embassy and its preservation to other places like New Canaan. Because these embassies are very far away. Nobody, I don't know how many of you have been to a US embassy, but you don't really get to go to a US embassy unless you've actually lost your passport or something, or unless, like myself, you're an immigrant and you actually come through these embassies. So for me, it was very dear to my heart because I actually immigrated through the embassy, the modern embassy in Madrid many moons ago. So, taking these sculptures now and bringing them back to the US, having a conversation about the importance of these embassies abroad, and allowing the work to have that message. Now, what it meant is that, of course, these were made in Norway. It meant traveling, and from Oslo, we brought them first to New York. And so we were very fortunate to have an invitation to display the larger ones on Park Avenue last year, and they were placed in relationship to some of the modernist buildings and cultural buildings on Park Avenue. And we were also then, it was an opportunity to expand on the project, and I began working on this set of prints as I was making the sculptures to really tell the story of the sculptures and the embassy itself. So I thought about, okay, what is the meaning of these new sculptures? What is the meaning of the fence? Well, what are the messages, quite literally, that went through the fence? And what was negotiated through this fence? So I looked at the outcome of these negotiations, which are all the treaties that the United States negotiated and signed with Norway, and I began to manipulate them in the same way that I manipulated the fence. All these treaties come in these text that is lines, lines of text that seem so logical, but anybody that has written anything knows that writing a sentence is not a straight thing. It's always convoluted. And even a negotiation, a dialogue between diplomats is also not a straight thing. So for me, it was very important to give that line of text the same treatment that I gave the line of fence, to try to involute it, to turn it into something two-dimensional, three-dimensional. And as I did that, the words off the page came out, and I began to identify some of the words that were interesting to me, and to name the sculptures after those treaties. So all the sculptures are named from words that are popping out of the treaties. And you can, if you take a look at some of these treaties, you can see those. This one is on space research, outer space research. And for example, this sculpture over here is called biosignature preservation. And if you followed the news recently, there's been this whole thing about the fact that NASA thinks that they actually found the biosignature evidence in Mars, and they're trying to figure out how to bring the rocks back from Mars where they found these, what they think are either bacteria or some other kind of deposition. If you look at limestone, you can see in limestone there's little shells. So that's biosignature preservation. There's evidence of life in this. So that's all still happening, but this was negotiated over a decade ago. And so, it's amazing to me that we think of diplomacy as war and peace, but actually research, education, taxation, aviation safety, the status of stateless people, defense, of course, are all part of what was negotiated at the embassy. So these are then come together as treaties, and there's 16 of them all around the exhibition. Each of the prints is one sculpture, or gives name to one sculpture. There's 51 of those sculptures as well. And then they all come together into an artist book, which is behind this wall over here. And I had to think about how do I put them in the book? So, of course, I I had to fold them. But I had to be very intentional about how to fold them. So I decided to fold the paper twice. And if you fold a paper twice, you get a bifold. And a bifold in Greek is a diploma. D for two and ploma for fold. And a diploma is what you would get, of course, when you graduate, but it's also what diplomats would get when they would go to the field. And diplomacy is the art of what you make with that folded piece of paper. So, of course, when you fold a piece of paper twice, you also get a triangle. And as you know now very well, the US Embassy in Norway is triangular in shape, in plan. So they actually, each of the prints becomes a little model of the US Embassy itself, and it fits into a carved mirror on the artist book that has all the names of all the rooms replaced with all the names of all the sculptures. So, and of course, these are also the names of the prints. So the plan of the US Embassy becomes a table of contents for the artist book, and then you can look inside into the book. So here's the book closed. This treatise on defenses. Obviously, there is a play on words here. And we were very fortunate that this became an exhibition preceding this one at the U.S. State Department's Museum of National Diplomacy, National Museum of American Diplomacy, excuse me. And that was a really wonderful moment. That's where the conversation that I wanted to initiate began with diplomats, because they're the one, this is literally in the entrance to the State Department. So as you go into the State Department, it's a museum. And so diplomats would come down, they were able to look around, and when they signed when they did the celebration for the 50th anniversary of the NATO treaty, they put the NATO treaty across the hall from our exhibition. And all the diplomats came down, and they came around and they saw that print behind you over there, which has, it's a treaty on Arctic research and if you know that, if you follow the news, again, that's all in the news about what are we going to do now that there's a melting ice and all the new, and that one is signed not just by the United States and Norway, but also by all of the powers of the Arctic. So Russia, Greenland, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Canada are signatories on the right of that print. You can take a look later. And they came down and they looked at that, and one of the diplomats said, "That's my signature right on the thing." So that was a really special moment. And you'll notice that in a kind of tongue-in-cheek, I also sign all the prints at the bottom together with them. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. You really brought us into the life of this extraordinary person, and it just, I was so kind of taken by the way in which you described his production, like how most people would love to do all this work in the span of 50 years. He did it all in 10 years. So when he was designing this embassy, he was doing how many other projects? How
A lot.
and were they all kind of office buildings, or was he also doing, big, small, medium at the same time?
So he, well, I mean,
Oh, sorry, is this on? Excuse me.
yeah,
But at least did everyone hear? Is that
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
Sorry.
So there was a lot of work that happened. If you look at the dates, I mean, it's like basically every building has almost the same date. It's all kind of, between 50 55, and that he gets all these commissions. The truth of the matter, I mean, Kevin Roche told me that Saarinen was not actually very interested in the corporate work. Kind of interesting. So he let them, he was, you can tell the things that Saarinen was really into. First of all, there are drawings by him. He was really into kind of the more sculptural work. He was really into the MIT projects. He did the chapel and the auditorium for MIT. He was totally into the TWA, the St. Louis Arch, the Yale buildings. But a lot of the corporate work, he let the youngsters who had worked for Mies do them.
So like Kevin Roche and
Dinkeloo and
Caesar
those-
Pelli
yeah.
did the entrance to this building, right? Like the canopy was Caesar Pelli.
Yeah, probably, yeah. And he was, he was very involved. He went on site to work on the London Embassy. There are images of him in the hotel room with various sketches. He often liked to do hundreds of different versions of buildings. He had this sort of kind of, he let it all loose, Just said like we could do it this way or this way or this way or that way. Like there's at least, like 200, 300 facade studies for the London Embassy before he settled. So, but he was definitely selective in the way. And some of the buildings also that I showed, like the deer, they were in such preliminary state, when he died. There's actually, there were so many stories that Kevin Roche told me, like the CBS Tower, for example. Saarinen was instrumental in deciding, we are going to do no steel, It's the only, I don't know if it still is, but it was at that time, it was like the really only load-bearing concrete tower. So he did some design, but otherwise it was really not designed fully. A lot of decisions hadn't been made, but Kevin told me that they were having a meeting about the elevator core when they get the call that Saarinen died. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, we just kept going with the meeting. So a lot of the things were not, there were very crucial decisions about the materials, the corten, all this sort of technical development was often done after he died. So, it comes down to the question of authorship. Who really designed the buildings if something only existed on a just a preliminary sketch? There's a lot of work to be done.